So today's webinar is with Dr. Hjördis Czesnick from the German Research Ombudsman, and it's on research integrity as part of a wider research culture. Hjördis Czesnick was she originally did her PhD in biology at the Humboldt University in Berlin, and she became part of the German Research Ombudsman in 2016. And she will tell us today about the network of Ombudspersons throughout Germany that she leads, and kind of her work with the European Network of Research Integrity Officers. So please, Hjördis, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks a lot, Brian, and also thanks a lot for the invitation to present our work in the realm of ReMO, of the ReMO project. Yeah, I will talk about research activity as part of a wider research culture. I will introduce the system of ombudspersons that we have in Germany, and also, of course, introduce the work of the committee that I'm working for. That's called German Research Ombudsman, or in German, it's Ombudsman für die Wissenschaft. Yeah, like Ryan said, I am the head of office here since 2016. And I will also give you some numbers from our work, numbers of inquiries, for example, talk a bit about organizational culture and its influence on, for example, the whistleblowing process and reporting, if you see research misconduct. And I will, yeah, like Brian said, also talk about the ENRIO network, which is the European network of research integrity officers. And first I'll start a bit with our national guidelines that we have in Germany. The first guidelines were published in 1999 from the German Research Foundation, the DFG. That's our largest funding agency in Germany. And the reason was that there was a big fraud scandal around 1997, as it's so often the case. And the research community noticed that there was actually, there were no structures for reporting this kind of research misconduct, or also how to investigate cases like this. And the whistleblowers faced serious retaliations. It was really bad. And then the DFG decided to set up a commission, and this commission developed 17 recommendations. And these are recommendations. The code itself is not a legally binding document, but the DFG said if your institution wants to receive further funding, and it is really the largest funding agency we have in Germany, then you have to implement these recommendations into a statute. And these statutes, they make these recommendations binding for the employees of the institution. And there were two recommendations that were focusing on ombudspersons. So one recommendation said that every institution should appoint ombudspersons, which they called independent mediators, as contact points when you have questions or when you see an alleged research misconduct. And also DFG said we need a national committee in addition. They have the same function, the national committee and the local ombudspersons. It's not a superior body, but researchers should have the choice to go to the local ombudsperson or to the national committee. So that was the original reason why the committee was founded. And in 2019, this code of conduct was in depth or comprehensively revised, and now takes into account some novel developments. Of course, the research system has changed over the last 20 years. And again, there's an implementation phase now where the local statutes have to be adapted. And again, there's a guideline on ombudspersons, so this hasn't changed. You have to at least have one ombudsperson in your institution. And also, researchers can decide to contact the German Research Ombudsman. Now, what you always have to keep in mind in Germany is that we have an extremely diverse research landscape. We have more than 100 universities and overall really more than 400 institutions of higher education, and additionally also more than 300 institutions, non-university or non-higher education research institutions, and almost all of these institutions have local ombudspersons. We have a list on our website where you can find these. So there's currently more than 700. I think in the meantime it's more than 800 local ombudspersons, and also these institutions have statutes that are really closely based on the national code of conduct that we have. And this is the committee in its current composition, I want to say. These committee members are appointed by the DFG, but afterwards we act independently of the DFG. So we don't talk to the funder about our cases. And currently we have a lawyer as a spokesperson, or someone in the research field of law. There's Professor Steinhauer. He's also an expert of library law and plagiarism and copyright, which is of course very helpful in this work. And then we have a biologist, Renate Scheibe, Daniela Mennel is in the field of medicine, and Roger Gläser is a technical chemist. So there's a spectrum of disciplines. They act for 4 years, and they do this on a voluntary basis. And we communicate at least weekly, sometimes really up to daily, of course with encrypted technology, about the cases that we have. And we also have regular meetings, all-day meetings in Berlin. And because they do this on a voluntary basis, there's our office where I have 3 more colleagues, and we support the committee's work. And in addition, since 2020, we also have a research project here. It's called Discussion Hubs to Foster Research Integrity. And the reason that we asked to get more funding for this project was that we saw that we get a lot of inquiries on the field of research data plagiarism and authorship. And the current guidelines in the Code of Conduct could be maybe, I don't want to say more precise, but actually go more into depth on how to deal with certain conflicts, for example. And they are doing a lot of research. They have interviews, expert workshops. They also recently conducted a survey amongst ombudspersons. And they also already wrote a book in 2022. It's open access. If you are German speaking, you can download this book on fairness in research. They established the concept of fairness as part of good scientific practice or good research practice. And we also use them as kind of think tank. And they also, of course, give advice to the Ombuds Committee on very specialized topics. And the main task of the committee and of our office is to give advice and we do consulting on research integrity, and we also offer conflict mediation. Based on the rules of good scientific practice. The principles are that we handle cases strictly confidentially and also neutrally and fairly. And this is also because we always ask for evidence in the matter. And you can contact us on the phone or also in writing by email, letters. And sometimes we have hearing, but we mostly communicate in writing because the members of the committee are, of course, spread all over Germany. And it's important to keep in mind that the ombudsman it's not a legal entity. So we can give advice, but we can't impose sanctions. And I will, can explain this exactly here on the next slide already. So if you have a concern or question, you can, like I said, go to the local ombudsperson and get advice or contact our office. And then there's 3 possible scenarios. Of course, it could be that we from our side can't confirm the concerns. For example, there's not enough evidence, or it's more like a research discourse instead of actually a breach of research integrity, or we can actually confirm the suspicion. Then there's 2 ways this could turn out. It's either something where you could theoretically still mediate between the concerned parties and seek a compromise. You can think of authorship conflicts, for example, or a data access. These kind of questions is usually something where you can ask for statements and try to find a solution. Of course, like I said, always based on good scientific practice and the Code of Conduct. And if we see something for severe misconduct, like a case of fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism, for example, this is this FFP that you see, then we have to transfer this case to the institution that is concerned, because in Germany we have a system of self-regulation, so the investigations will be performed from the institution that is concerned. And if, for example, we see a case of honorary authorship, alleged honorary authorship, and we can't resolve this, or we cannot exclude that there was misconduct also in the field of authorship, for example, then we also have the option, of course, to transfer this to a local commission. this is an overview of our the number of our inquiries. So you can see that over the years, of course, the numbers were increasing, and now we seem to have arrived at around 200 inquiries per year. Now, currently, the state of the art is 102, which means, I guess, at the end of the year, we will again have 200 cases. Interestingly, you see 2019, when the new code of conduct was published, there was again a spike in numbers. And again, if you think, well, 200 inquiries is not so much for all of Germany, you have to keep in mind that, of course, we also have the local ombudspersons who can be addressed. Yeah. And here I'm showing you an overview of what we typically would do. I already mentioned you can talk to us on the phone, you can talk to us by email, we can start an Ombuds procedure. But what is striking is that last year, for example, we only opened up 11 actual procedures where we did talk to the other side, always with the explicit consent, of course, of the person who's addressing us. That's 5% only, and most people, like 89 cases, we could solve by email, another like 44 just on the phone, because we give a lot of advice, and we say that we help people to self-help, basically. For many people, that is already enough to get an opinion, to get advice. Yeah, and we also give advice to local ombudspersons, for example, or investigating commissions. This number is also increasing, so there's also a need for advice at this level. Here are the status groups that have contacted us. So we don't ask for these data. That's why there's a lot of unknown also in this chart. But I'm only showing you this because I always find it impressive, and these numbers are quite stable, that again, half of the people who contacted us, at least, were still in the phase of dependency. We have the undergraduates, we have PhD students and postdocs, and they comprised, again, almost 50%. And this is quite stable over the years. Yeah, so there's a lot of need for advice at this level. And here you see the research fields. Again, these numbers are surprisingly stable. It's always 25. Now, last year it was 27%, stemming from the humanities and social sciences, and another 30% from life sciences. There's a high percentage of medicine in this category, in the life sciences. They have a lot of problems, but it's also a large field in Germany. So this you also have to say that natural sciences, engineering, informatics, some interdisciplinary cases we always have, and some are general inquiries. So this is actually quite a good reflection of the research system that we have, or the research fields that are studied in Germany. We really have everything. And yeah, this is statistics of the topics. What also we see every year is 25% even authorship conflicts or questions and plagiarism. Yeah, there's a lot of questions also. It's not necessarily allegations or conflicts. Some people also are contacting us to prevent the conflict. Data manipulation, we only get a few cases every year submitted, and we only forward them if there's really also really evidence submitted, because we have to avoid a damage of reputation for the people who they are accused. Research impediment, data access, data usage, there's always also a percentage of that. We have lack of supervision, of course, and then some other things like conflict of interest, complaints about other institutions, and a lot of questions on procedural matters. I would have to look it up, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of ombudspersons also in this category that ask us about procedural matters. And then you have scientific discourse also, and some other miscellaneous questions. But yeah, like I said, a high percentage of authorship and plagiarism, and also data access, which is why we started also this discussion hubs project. So what can actually ombudspersons do? How would an ombuds proceeding work? We help to solve this conflict by asking always both sides for a statement on this conflict matter, and also both sides are always given the opportunity to again reply on what was said. And like I said, we always ask for evidence to support your claim, which makes it easier to then find a solution based on the GRP rules. We also take into account discipline, of course, and sometimes it's very helpful to look into journal-specific guidelines or the associations of the discipline, if there are recommendations in that field. And sometimes we also have to refer to other counseling services, and we do some checks for the people who contact us, who else could be contacted in this manner. And then, of course, we are always asking ourselves, why are there so few people who actually are speaking up and who dare to open up a proceeding? And the reason is, of course, the power imbalances. We all know that there are such strong hierarchies and power imbalances in research, multiple dependencies in academia, especially in Germany. I'm pretty sure everyone who's here has heard of this. And we are often getting reports that the conflict is based on or somehow mixed with an abuse of power. And that, of course, leads to people having strong fears of consequences if they start a proceeding. And we often get told on the phone also what ways of retaliation people would expect. And it's often retaliation in an informal way. For example, defamation, a bad letter of reference, a bad grade, everything that one can imagine, worsening the work conditions, they're not allowed to go to the conference anymore, and so on. And it's very hard to prove these things. And that's why it's also difficult to report and to be protected afterwards. Yeah. And now I want to show you some data from the survey that I mentioned. Katrin Frisch and Niederig, two colleagues here from the Discussion Hub project who conducted a study specifically on conflicts in the field of authorship and data usage. But first of all, they were asking how many inquiries do you have on average, just generally. And what you see is that the most ombudspersons had 1 to 5 per year. Some had even more than 20, but that's really low. And some even have none. 20% had no inquiries. Reasons we can only speculate, but we have some speculations on that. And then they also asked, how often do you see a combination of different forms of conflicts? And again, 45% said quite often, and another 23% said at least half of the time there's a mix of conflict. And if you said yes here, then you are asked another question, which is what types of conflicts is the research integrity conflict in combination with? You could give also multiple answers here. And there's a high percentage, of course, of abuse of relationships of dependency. So the ombudspersons themselves confirmed what we are already suspected. There again is a lack of insufficient supervision and communication. There has so often been a lack of communication amongst the group or from the boss, the group leader. And again, they also asked for abuse of power, which is very close to abuse of relationships of dependency, and that was also a very high percentage of people who have observed this. Of course, also mobbing, sexual harassment, really bad. So these things are also seen by ombudspersons. So what I already told you is how ombudsperson can support researchers if they do dare to start a proceeding. The ombudspersons ensure that it's fair. And the solution that will be found should be definitely based on the code of conduct or the statute of the institution. So it should be based on good research practice. And it depends, of course, on the number of cases that they have. But if they see over and over something is happening in the same faculty, they can also, of course, while maintaining confidentiality on the actual persons involved, they can raise awareness on structural problems by, for example, sometimes they have annual meetings with the leadership. They can maybe point at least to a faculty and say, this faculty needs a training in plagiarism, for example, on how to prevent and so on. This can happen. And what also is a trend in Germany is that we get more and more ombuds offices supporting ombudspersons. That means that the institution affords affording staff to support the ombudsperson because all of them are acting voluntarily. And the ombuds office staff is often involved in prevention. They give trainings, for example. And of course, since they do this full-time or part-time at least, they have a higher capacity to also look into institutional strategies, to write maybe guidelines for the institution, things like this. And the Ombuds offices that we have in Germany actually now have formed a network in 2020. So what our office here, the German Research Ombudsman office, is doing is every 2 years, together with the committee, we are organizing a big conference for ombudspersons and for ombuds offices. And while we had this conference in 2020, the ombuds offices got connected. And here I can show you a photo. There is also male participants in this network. They just were not present at this meeting. This happened last week. We also meet, so our office is also a member, and we meet monthly online and once per year or so, jointly in a different city. And this is such a great network because they already accomplished to write a handbook for ombudspersons, or we jointly wrote a handbook to give advice, because it's very difficult for ombudspersons to get training. There are some classes offered, but it's not enough classes that could cover 800 ombudspersons every year, for example. So there's not enough training for ombudspersons. So this handbook, which will be published probably very, very soon, maybe next week even, it even has some spaces in the handbook where you can adapt it to your local conditions. So there's gaps in the handbook where you can say, for example, at our institutions it works like this, and then the handbook can be given to every new ombudsperson, and the ombudsperson can be trained on what they have to do in their job. So I made another slide, which is how ombuds offices actually can support researchers. And we have a website, which I also am showing here, a website on our website, where you can find a list of the ombuds offices that we currently have in universities. And we also noted the range of activities so that maybe other institutions get inspired. Oh, wow, all of this can be done by an ombuds office. So they are the first contact point. It's very similar to what we do for the national committee. You can contact the ombuds office staff by phone or email. They do the storing of documents, which is often a big topic for ombudspersons. What do I do with my notes at the end of the term? They are involved in trainings in the institution. Some of them offer plagiarism checks, or they routinely do plagiarism checks of dissertations, for example. They do networking and can inform the ombudspersons, and the ombudspersons often don't have time to do this by themselves. And some of them are now starting to write annual reports, which is amazing because we get data from research integrity cases or activities from research institutions. UK is doing it for quite some time already. The universities in UK have obliged themselves as part of an association, which they have to publish a report every year on research integrity activities, not only numbers and cases, but also activities. And now the first university in Germany has done it. That was the Ombuds office of the University of Göttingen. It's published on their website. You can find this report. And what you see here, and what I find so striking, is that I just told you ombudspersons are contacted 3 times, 5 times a year. This office has been contacted 85 times. So you definitely see, and that was 21, that there is a need to ask questions. Doesn't mean that every case is a case of misconduct that is reported, which you see here already. Like there's a number of general inquiries, there's preventative advice, lecturers ask questions, and then there's of course also consultations of cases of conflict. But that doesn't mean that University of Göttingen has more conflicts. It just means they have a better system to confidentially ask for advice and report something. Maybe there's higher visibility. We have our theories why this seems to work better for people to start the actual to dare to contact the office. And maybe it's also a lower threshold than asking Professor, Doctor, Honorary Doctor for advice. Maybe we just can speculate because this we haven't completely explored, but it could be that this is the reason. And of course, what also has an influence on reporting is the organizational climate. We have research on that, mostly from companies, not so much from public institutions, but it's definitely clear that the organizational climate has an influence whether there is a culture of silence, as it is called, or a speak-up culture. And in research, for sure, it has an influence what happens at the group level and what happens at the entire organizational level. For example, how do your group leaders behave? The bosses, what kind of are they open? Are they really strict and really negative as soon as somebody approaches them with the question of conflict? What are they doing? How have similar cases been dealt with in the past? This institutional knowledge, even if it's only anecdotes, people know that. And if somebody has been retaliated against, other people won't dare to speak up. Is there even a reporting channel? Is there an office or contact? I mean, now we have a European audience, so maybe not every institution has such a contact point. And is it welcoming? Is it welcoming, accepted to ask questions and to speak up? And I already mentioned the ENRIO network, which I briefly also wanted to talk about, because we just talked about protection of whistleblowers at ENRIO. This network was founded in 2007 and has ever since increased a lot. We now have more than 30 members from 23 countries in Europe. And I'd definitely recommend you to visit ENRIO's website, because there's a lot of resources. For example, also country reports. If you want to get informed on the research integrity system in another European country, you find reports on the structure of the research integrity structure. ENRIO is also organizing a congress for practitioners, and everyone is invited. Yeah, especially of course also Ombudspersons or research integrity advisors could go there, or if you do research in this field, you can either take part in participate in Paris or also virtually. So please also check that out. And there are working groups. Ever since ENRIO has been founded, there were different working groups working on topics of research integrity and research ethics. That's the RE. And for example, there was a working group on investigation of research misconduct, and that group has already published a book, a handbook. And now there is about to be published a working group outcome from the working group that dealt with the protection of whistleblowers in research. And this handbook, the work on this has started already in 2016, 17, and then the working group really came alive in 2018. But then, of course, we all know there was a pandemic, and ENRIO has also went through a big shift. We are now actually a really a legal association. So this working group cut down a bit, I want to say. And in 21, me and actually another colleague from the University of Hamburg, Helga Nolte, we reactivated this group because this topic was really important and everybody agreed. So we set up a drafting group, and now I can present you first insights into the content. And basically we have the final draft now after 2 years, and it's about to be published. And the handbook starts with the checklist that gives a general overview where institutions, also researchers, funding organizations can check how their institution is actually dealing with whistleblowers and what kind of measures they have to protect. Are there maybe gaps? And then we start with definitions, of course, of whistleblowing, all kinds of things that are related to the process. We give an overview of the EU directive dealing with the protection of employees, of course, not employers, employees, which now has to be implemented into national law in all European countries. We also talk about whistleblowing management systems, which according to this EU directive have to be installed in institutions with more than 50 employees. So this definitely applies also to research institutions. And then we have a big core chapter, and that deals with the question, what can research institutions actually do? And I'm telling you this because all of this is definitely strongly connected to the research climate, which we also talk about a lot in this handbook. We also have a chapter addressing aftercare for whistleblowers, something that is really not looked into detail so much. And we also address other factors contributing to the protection. For example, what's the role of funders, what's the role of ministries or national regulations, publishers also are addressed. And we have a large chapter also addressing whistleblowers, directly researchers who, whistleblowers is a strong word, but I can explain to you why we decided to use this word. We give practical tips. If you consider to report something, what should you or could you consider? It's very hands-on, and like I said, we have diverse target groups here. That's why it's quite a large book. And so what can research institutions do? This is the chapters that we deal with in our core chapter. Like I said, first of all, every institution should look to foster a culture of research integrity, and the institution and their members should reflect on their attitude towards good research practice. You should, of course, have an institutional code of conduct. It's not the case in every European country yet. You should provide advice, or like also it says in point 5, you could appoint research integrity advisors or ombudspersons who, of course, have this role to provide advice. And also, research integrity should be trained all over the members of the institutions. Like I said, we have practical tips. We also have a chapter dedicated to why whistleblowing management systems are important, and why also anonymity should be considered. There's still research institutions that say we don't deal with inquiries that are submitted anonymously. And we think also in my office, we think that it's absolutely possible to give advice, and also sometimes possible to even start investigations without knowing the identity of the person that submits the evidence. For a plagiarism case, classic example, you don't need to have the identity. Can the institution really afford to just reject this case? I mentioned the care and aftercare. What does it mean specifically? How do you really also take care of maybe the psychological well-being of the people who do dare to blow the whistle, and maybe also other people who are part of the process. Even the research integrity officers sometimes become whistleblowers themselves. All of this is addressed. It's addressed if it's a good idea to publish case reports. We think yes, if you maintain confidentiality, obviously, and for breaches of confidentiality, there should be consequences, and this should be sanctioned, because the confidentiality is very important to have a fair process and to really protect all the people involved. And it happens very few times. That is, the research is showing that, our experience is showing that, but sometimes you have malicious accusations, and those should, of course, be defined as research misconduct. But what I clearly have to say is, the fear of installing a whistleblowing management system, or of saying we have an ombudsperson here, this is the person you can report to. The fear is always, oh, then we have all these false accusations. People will flood the system with false accusations. It doesn't happen. The first institutions now have actually installed also an anonymous whistleblowing, like digital whistleblowing channels, and it's not flooded for sure. And that is also not what the research shows. So, but we wanted to address it, so we did. And the other factors are also briefly mentioned. Of course, the whistleblowers also have their own responsibility. We address the labor law or other ways of protecting from retaliation by law, and why ministries have an important role. Funders, I told you just how our funder in Germany managed to turn a non-binding framework into legally binding statutes. That is great. And we also address why it's very complicated to have cross-border cases. We refer to literature, to documents. I'm just really, as you see, I'm very happy that this book will be finished and published soon, because it's really great. And publishers, if you have problems with publishers, we also address that. So this is my last slide. I'm coming to the summary of what factors from our perspective, from the German Research Ombudsman perspective, are important to develop a culture of research integrity. Is, of course, contact bodies, and also contact bodies that also accept anonymous questions and reports. And it's also good to have a national advice body, because I showed you we have like 200 inquiries per year. So since I'm here, I've seen more than 1,000 types of inquiries, and we can collect a lot of knowledge. We can spot gaps in the system. We can see, like, wow, suddenly we have more questions on this topic, and there's a higher need for that. For example, like research communication and GRP, for example, so we can spot really gaps and talk to DFG, for example, or talk to other players, to publishers. We do that. We just yesterday we had a workshop on artificial intelligence tools and their effect on good research practice. So we also have the capacity to do that as a national body. I mentioned, of course, the institutional protection of good faith whistleblowers, which is so important to create a culture where people can feel safe to report something. And that is what you want. You really want to embrace that the research record is corrected. I also mentioned education. Research integrity courses should be mandatory, but not only for undergraduates, as it's handled currently. We think it's very important that all researchers of all career stages are informed about the rules of good scientific practice, and we know that is not the case. And if you have a contact body, please also make it visible. Don't fear that there will be flooding. Yes, okay, the Ombuds office has now 85 questions, but that is still not so much. It's doable, and that is exactly why we need these places, so that people dare to speak up. And there are a lot of guidelines, so these should also be published, so people can also help themselves. And you should involve all stakeholders and hold them accountable. I mentioned a few of them, and we also do that. We are in contact with publishers, we also go to conferences, and we try to really get everyone involved. So that's it. You can contact our office always if you have questions. There's a long German version of the email address and the website, or you take the green, short, internationally friendly version. And of course, I would also like to encourage you to visit the ENRIO website, and please come to Paris and visit us at our congress. Thanks a lot. And I think now we have some time for questions, I hope.